this presentation, you will learn about data collection and analysis. Data analysis is the most crucial part of any research. In this stage, the researcher summarizes the collected data and constructs or interprets it in a way so as to fulfill the objectives of the study. It is done through analytical and logical reasoning to reveal patterns, trends, or relations between the variables studied. The method of data analysis and interpretation are starkly different in qualitative and quantitative researches. This is because since the research designs are distinct, the form in which the data gets collected is also different. However, in either case, the purpose of data analysis is to interpret the data collected so as to reach an inference on the hypothesis or the objectives of the study. The analyzed data can then be used by the researcher as evidence as they attempt to answer the research problem. Basic steps in data analysis. Although the method of data collection could change based on the research design being used, most data analysis follow three basic steps: preparing the data for analysis, analyzing the data using appropriate methods, interpreting the data. According to John Best, in a research, the stage of data analysis is when the data gets processed by the researcher. How the information collected gets analyzed depends on two things: type of information, descriptive, quantitative, qualitative, attitudinal, how the researcher chooses to communicate the findings to the readers. When analyzing and reporting the collected data, the method used for the analysis would depend on whether the researcher is using a quantitative or qualitative design or a mixed design. It is interesting to note that the distinction between the two often tends to be more theoretical and academic in nature, as most researchers are likely to use some level of both. However, there are methods used exclusively for quantitative and qualitative designs. Aside from the quantitative and qualitative distinction, the researcher must also take into account whether data analysis would be done manually or with the help of a computer. If the data collected is purely descriptive, then normally the researcher would choose to manually analyze the data. However, if there is a copious amount of data, then the researcher could do it with the help of a computer program. For qualitative researches, there are several computer softwares like NUD, DIST-N6 or NVIVO, etc. for this purpose. If the research is quantitative, then the researcher first has to decide on the kind of analysis required. That is, if it is a frequency distribution, cross-tabulation, or if it requires statistical procedures like regression analysis, factor analysis, etc. There are several software programs like SPSS, R, and Python, which can also be utilized by the researcher for quantitative data analysis. Data analysis is basically concerned with data reduction. At this stage, the researcher deduces the data which has been gathered so as to make sense of it. In case of quantitative data, this is done through some form of mathematical or statistical manipulation, such as averages, tables, etc. And in qualitative data, this is done by grouping the collected data into various categories or themes. The preceding stage, that is data collection, collects copious amounts of data, only some of which is entirely relevant to the study. Data analysis, hence, works as a kind of data filter, allowing the researcher to take that data which helps him or her justify the purpose and needs of their research. In terms of data that is collected by the researcher for the purpose of the study, analysis could be broadly separated into two categories: primary data analysis, secondary data analysis. Primary data analysis refers to that data which is collected by the researcher themselves for the specific focus of the research. This implies that the data being analyzed has been collected by the researcher or a group of researchers to address certain questions. The method of research design and data collection too has to be carefully selected by the researcher. In contrast, secondary data analysis is concerned with making sense of the data which has been collected by someone else for another purpose or project. The researcher has had no direct involvement in the collection of data, and it was not done to address the specific research questions of the researcher. Therefore, the same piece of data could be primary data for one researcher and secondary data for another. In case of secondary data analysis, the research attempts to utilize the information gathered by another researcher to support the claims and objectives of his or her study. Since the data has not been collected by the researcher, it is important that he or she familiarizes themselves with the data, method used for data collection, what the response categories were, the population that was being studied, and the other specifics of the data. As mentioned earlier, data analysis is a crucial stage in research. It is important to ensure that all the steps of the research being conducted is valid, reliable, and ethically just. Creswell mentions a few tips researchers should keep in mind when analyzing data. Remain neutral. In certain cases, researchers may be tempted to support and embrace the views of the participants. This implies that instead of taking a neutral view, the researcher is inclined towards a particular opinion or view, or to present only that which supports the research hypothesis. In doing so, they may ignore or avoid some of the data that has been collected. In qualitative studies, this implies taking the side and thereby presenting the views of the participants only in positive light. In quantitative research, it could mean disregarding data may approve or disapprove the hypothesis the researcher holds. Avoid disclosing only positive results. Ethically, it is important for researchers to disclose their complete findings, irrespective of whether or not they may suit the researcher's inclinations. In a quantitative research, the data analysis should reflect the statistical tests and no part of the data collected should go underreported. In qualitative research, the researcher must take care to report the whole range of findings, even patterns and themes which may not support his or her research. Respect the privacy of the participants. When analyzing the data, the researcher must be careful to respect the privacy of the researcher. While their personal information may be collected during the data collection process, during the transcription stage, the researcher must disassociate the names of the participants from the responses. In qualitative research, the investigators use pseudonyms or aliases, which is an alternate name, to respect the identity and views of the participants. I hope you now have a better understanding of data analysis. Thank you for watching the presentation.